So Sam, what do you call a hellbound aquatic soul?
Uh, that's a good question. I don't know.
A devilfish.
Okay. I like that.
What's the only thing better than three poker documentaries?
What?
Four poker documentaries.
Oh my God. We're still not
Well,
watching Rounders?
and welcome everybody to another episode of the Two Fish at the Table Poker Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Legend Ben One on Poker Stars.
And I'm your other host, East Coast Sam on Poker Stars, as well as OMG I Love Bjork on Discord. Welcome to our very special episode where, yes, we're going to be reviewing four separate poker documentaries. A lot of different materials in each of these documentaries. One of them's biographical, focusing on one player. We have one that's focusing on like three or four players. It's going to be interesting to lay this all out. And then we will give you our updates on the Mind Sport Olympiad at the end. Ben and I are going to be talking about our performances and our experiences thus far with the MSO.
Exactly. And, we've discussed a few different poker documentaries in some previous podcasts. This will be our third time. And I'd like to say that this is probably on average the best bunch.
Mm-hmm.
With maybe the exception of, I would say I think 10 for 10 and Nosebleed were very good, but I thought the Sugar one wasn't so great. I think this is a pretty solid batch. I wasn't too let down by any of them. There's flaws. There's good points to each of these, and they all cover a different area of the poker ecosystem. So I'm happy that we had a good variety of publicly accessible on YouTube documentaries to talk about, so that anybody else could watch these on their own time and form their own opinions.
Yeah, well, all the documentaries you've been watching, I think, are publicly accessible on YouTube, at least for the time being. I think all of these won't go down for copyright reasons or anything, so y'all should be able to watch them. Yeah, I mean, up till this point, I think my favorite documentary was probably 10 for 10. That was the one on Martin Jacobson that explored his preparations for the main event final table, where, of course, he won. Just very concise, straightforward, nice little 20-minute documentary. Didn't overstay its welcome. Was well shot, well edited. I think probably the worst documentary we've seen is the American Dream one, which had so much potential in it, with the storyline of this woman who's returning to the game after years of absence to make money in order to help her production company. So much potential in that storyline, so interesting, but they really derailed the movie with all these interviews from all these different poker players and Larry Flint of all people. Yeah, I do agree with you, Ben, that these documentaries on average were better than the ones we reviewed before. We'll get into the nitty gritty on each one, but I was pretty happy with some of the stuff we
Yeah,
saw.
after I completed my watch of each one, I gave each one a score out of 10.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of I'll cover how I grade each one as we get there. But I think to start off with, I think it's we should start off with The Devilfish, a 2019 48-minute long documentary, kind of a biopic sort of ish film, kind of in the same vein as the Stu Unger or Dale Negreanu documentaries, covering the character, the icon, the European legend that is Dave Devilfish Elliott.
Yeah, so this was produced after he passed away in 2015 and after he went into the Hall of Fame. So it's more of like a tribute documentary than anything else. You do learn about his life, you do learn about his accomplishments in the game, but it's really about celebrating him as a character and giving the people who knew and loved him a time to sort of reflect on his life.
Yeah, and this will be a recurring thing, ironically, for a lot of these films. It kind of self-divides itself into different chapters in the
Mm-hmm.
actual documentary. So, part one being called The April Fool, which kind of covers a bit more of the biographical information, his family. We meet his third wife and Petita in her house and with their daughter. Devilfish had three wives, eight kids during his life. We see some spliced in content from other poker documentaries, other TV shows. So we kind of get a good archival retrospective on a few different times in his life. It's nothing particularly super insightful. It's pretty base level content. And Personally, I felt that the best quarter of this film was the last quarter.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, I like the stuff where it was talking about him growing up in Hull. We get to see his childhood home. We get to hear from a couple of his childhood friends and relatives. But in terms of, if you're familiar with Devilfish and you've seen compilations of his hands on YouTube, you've really seen a lot of this already. You already know who he is as a person at the table. He was very self-expressive, very willing to put himself out there and mixed up with Tony G and Phil Hellmuth. So it just sort of treads the same ground as before. If you're somebody who had never heard of Devilfish Elliott, by the end, you'll probably get a good, decent sense of who he was. You'll see some of his table action, but you don't know a whole lot about him. We're told over and over again, he's this great character. We're told over and over again, he had a big influence on UK poker in the 2000s, but not too much. We're not shown that much about him, and that's a problem.
I mean, we do see him in the music scene, with some band members. That's kind of nice. You don't see that too often with poker players. Part two, as Mike Sexton, also rest in peace, talking about how there was sort of the old characters era of poker, and then the new robot characters in the modern era of poker. That was good to hear Mike Sexton talk about that. And then also there's a pretty amusing clip of Devilfish showing up very late to the poker Premier League, which again talks about how showing up late was kind of a sign of like arrogance and of like ego, and like being the most late makes you like kind of like the best in that moment. So that was kind of funny because Hellmuth, of all people, who shows up late to the main events all the time after in the early days in the 2000s, for example, being shown up in that way was kind of funny. But otherwise it's nothing particularly insightful or super memorable. I mean, it's not boring. It's not self-indulgent like Nagano's documentary was or anything. It just isn't anything mind-blowing. And it's also a documentary that's not really taking the viewer on a journey per se. I mean, yes, there is part one, part two, part three, part four, but there's not like a central narrator like driving the look into his past or anything like you might express in other documentaries. And and also it's a lot of just like splicing together old interviews and old content with just other interviewed players. So it's nothing particularly unique to the directorial style of the film either.
Yeah, I mean, you've really summed it up. I mean, this is just sort of a by the numbers, gives you a sense of who Devilfish was. I think the best moment was Marcel Lusque's interview at the end, where he and Devilfish had a long friendship. And Marcel Lusque has a conversation with Devilfish where he finds that the Devilfish is cancer and only has a very short time left to live. The Devilfish just kept living it up. He wasn't scared of dying. He wasn't just going to sit in a hospital bed and pass away. He kept playing poker. He kept playing music. He kept looking forward to the future. So that was, I think, a very human moment, and really the only real human emotional moment of the documentary. I mean, for the most part, it's a lot of just clips of him playing poker, a lot of clips of him talking. And as we've talked about before with montages of speech play, it's the context that matters just as much as the speech itself. When we see him talking to Phil Hellmuth, we don't get any sense of what their rapport was beforehand. Phil Hellmuth doesn't appear in this documentary. They have Sam Trinket and a few other players, but no big names in this. So it just feels lacking in that sense. Again, we're being told about Devilfish, but we're not being shown anything.
Yeah, and not to mention, it could be nice to have had a bit more of his family interspersed into the movie. Maybe looking at old photos, old home videos with the camera crew or something like that. Just something a bit more personal. And again, I want to be respectful of Devilfish. He is a memorable character. He appeared in a little bit in the ESPN coverage, not a ton, but and again, this is a perfectly serviceable 48-minute watch if you just want to learn about him. But otherwise, you might be a bit let down if you're expecting something kind of extra special.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have much to say about it otherwise. It's totally fine when you're watching it, but I would give it a 2 out of 5. It's just kind of
I just kind of put a 5 out of 10, just kind of middle. It's fine. It's you can watch it and move on to something else. It doesn't overstay its welcome. If you're watching it at 2x speed like me, then 24 minutes. But it is what it is. And again, it's not trying to be anything more than what it is, though. So that's another, I think, okay. It's just it's a little thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And so heading into our second in our quartet of films here, we have the slightly longer For Love or Money, a poker documentary made in 2020 that's about 65 minutes long. And this film kind of felt like a combination of two films, Nosebleed and The Chase of the American Dream, actually. So that was kind of amusing. It focuses on two poker players for the most part, Chris Leong and Stanley Lee, particularly during the 2018 summer. covering the World Series of Poker with the goal to win a bracelet, just like a nosebleed, in a 46-day span.
Yeah, and you mentioned that, it sort of focuses on Chris and Stan, because there's like the American Dream documentary, we have a lot of other players being interviewed, and it'll just kind of cut to them at random. There'll be a 30-second clip of Chris or Stan playing poker or talking to the camera for some reason, and it'll cut to another player. And it's an assortment of different players. They did not get as big names as they got in the American Dream. The biggest name would be Scott Blumstein, who had just won the main event in 2017. He's featured fairly prominently. He pops up several times throughout the coverage. But yeah, I mean, it's like American Dream. It just doesn't, it's too bipolar, right? You have this one storyline of these two guys trying to win a bracelet, and then you just cut at random and have these segments to these other players, and neither of them really get proper development. It's not as bad as the American Dream, but it's, yeah.
Well, unlike American Dream, I didn't feel like there was as much of a story between Chris and Stan that like I really wanted to know more about, compared to like having this mother, ex-husband, child situation. But and we get, I think there were a couple of specific stories that I actually really appreciated amongst the interviews that were separate from the sort of main narrative of the documentary. I'd argue that Blumstein actually is kind of like the B plot if you have the A plot with Chris and Stan, because he appears, he gets an award for like the poker accomplishment of the year, which was, it's kind of a strange award. It's kind of like, well, if they're just going to the main event champion, that's like, just don't have, they won the main event, you don't need to honor that again. But anyway, so Chris and Stan each had a fairly healthy Hendon Mob roster of accomplishments prior to this particular summer. They have very slightly contrasting styles as far as how they approach their day-to-day routine and how they approach poker. A bit more of a contrast than we got compared to our two main subjects in Nosebleed. So that was a slight plus, I guess. And then, like you said, we have a good, healthy roster of interviewed players, with maybe a couple brief cameos by Bryn Kenny and Daniel Negreanu. But players I didn't really have much attachment to. It was kind of weird to say Marco Traniello, who's formerly married to Jennifer Harmon in the modern era. You don't really see him much nowadays. But really, for me, there were two specific interviews that I really latched onto and enjoyed hearing. One being the Asher Conniff misclick story, where he actually bought into the wrong tournament before he was having a big family trip, and he then won that tournament, which was a satellite into the WPT World Championship, and then that turned into a big win. That's kind of cool because, I mean, that's just a really unique story that you don't see too often. Misclicking into the wrong tournament, because you're usually pretty careful when you're buying into a real money tournament online.
Yeah, that was a funny story. I mean, it's kind of just thrown into the documentary, but it is an interesting story that I think actually that happened with Chris Moneymaker in with the 03 main event, that he registered for a tournament thinking it was just a tournament, but it turned out to be a satellite for the main event. So it's kind of funny that there's that parallel. And yeah, it's it is an interesting story that he wins the satellite tournament, and then he calls his mom, and his mom says, "I had a dream. You got to go play this tournament." So he goes and plays the tournament. He wins the WPT championship. So it's good for him. It's an interesting story.
And then the other center story was the Reese Peace story, where Spencer Eunice meets Ryan Reese, bought 5% of him in that 2013 main event, which ended up turning into $420,000 out of, I think it was out of $500 or something, plus 5%. So that's pretty freaking awesome. That's pretty cool. And you just assume I never would have known that had we just watched the main event, from 10 years ago, that Reese would have had people, with pieces in him, because it's just kind of cool to have, it's not just Reese being made, a millionaire. You have a lot of other people maybe potentially becoming substantially wealthier and well off because of this one little Calvin Johnson fan from an obscure part of the country. So those are pretty cool. The rest of the interviews really didn't do much for me at all, though.
Yeah, I mean, there's, kind of an interesting montage about tournaments versus cash games, and some players prefer tournaments and some players prefer cash games. And there's, again, this motif of tournaments being described as kind of being like the lottery, where you just sort of play it and you hope for the best, and cash games are more about the money, and there's a sort of different type of play. That was, I guess, kind of interesting. But yeah, for the most part, it's just kind of, it just cuts to these people randomly. There's a montage about whether or not poker's gambling, and this guy talks about the dictionary definition of gambling and this and that. Very strange.
Yes, and then again, the A plot again, much like Nosebleed or American Dream, it kind of cuts to a day in that summer with either Stan or Chris in an event, and then we kind of watch them. If they last long enough, they kind of explain what happened or how things were going. Chris, a lot of these getting the information of the camera crew comes through text message like, "Oh, I'm doing really well with my stack," and then by the time they get there, oh, he's busted in two hands. Since then, that was kind of an interesting little payoff for that versus the camera crew just being there the whole time. And again, they both go on sort of tangential journeys in their few events that we actually see. We only see a handful of events in this whole film, though. Maybe like the Colossus, the Millionaire Maker, and the main event, which are kind of like if you were gonna grab average Joe, I would probably have guessed those three events. I run, it was kind of funny to pick those three. But Chris, it seems like he just kind of can tank a stack very quickly.
Yeah.
And Stan, he has a track record in the main event and the Millionaire Maker, where he had actually, it's considered kind of Stan's like best events because he had cashed in the event multiple years in a row, and he ended up actually getting into 47th place in the 2018 Millionaire Maker, and then also making a very deep run in the 2018 main event, despite being very up and down. Whereas Chris goes bust in level one of day one of the main event in a gross spot where, honestly, before he explained the hand, I thought it's definitely his fault. But the way that hand put out, I don't blame him, actually.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that was probably the best moment of the documentary, was hearing Chris talk about that hand and lay it out and how he kind of blamed himself. So he had pocket jacks. The flop is a jack high flop. Big bet call, turn bricks, bet call. River's a king. Chris goes all in with a set. The guy calls him, turns over pocket kings, and Chris is explaining this hand to the viewer, and this has just happened, and he's clearly a little disappointed. But he says, I don't really know what I'm doing there on the river, shoving all in, right? Who's going to call me that I beat? Pocket aces, pocket kings? I mean, what's going through my mind there? Only, pocket kings is going to call me.
Right.
Set there.
Not to mention that board, there was literally the three jacks was the second nuts. It was jack 4-3-8 king, so there's no straight chance out there. There's no flushes out there. So really, it's either his opponent gets lucky with two kings and hits a two outer on the river, or he's got the best hand and he's trying to win a lot of chips there. So pretty crazy spot. Whereas Stan was only at 13,000 after day one, and somehow was able to enter the top 10 in chips by day 5, and then he goes out in 122nd place, which again is still very impressive. That was a very large main event that year. But and again, so that's kind of fun seeing how they did. I had no idea how well they performed in that tournament, so it was interesting to see how that developed. Ironically, I was watching the 2022 main event, day 6, just randomly that later the same night I was watching this film, and there was Stan at the table. He made a deep run in 2022 at the top 100, so he really does have some serious main event tournament skills there. He's really these guys aren't just. I mean, I never heard them prior to this film, but they do have some legit skill, and it just goes to show you that the world is so big enough that you could think you've watched all the poker TV in the world, and there's still going to be always great players that you just have not seen yet.
Yeah, and Stanley comes off like a really, really cool guy. He seems very chill. He mentions that he doesn't, Chris created a package for himself to get investors, but Stan's just like, I'll play when I feel like it. If I'm not feeling ready, I won't do it. And even as he's talking about how he needs to stay focused and he's losing chips, he still comes off as very amicable, very calm. He knows what he has to do. So it's good to see that he's continued successful. I haven't really heard too much about Chris Long. Apparently in the montage at the end, it says that he won a couple more tournaments. So that's good, but.
So I felt that the first few minutes were probably the worst of this whole film, just all the interviews and yada yada, boring. And then again, once it gets into the Nosebleed style storytelling, it's okay. It's very unfocused. It's not really a central theme or narrative, even though it does have, the Kristen Stan story going on. I don't think we got enough of a deep look into their characters, or into their
Yeah.
lives. As even Nosebleed, where we didn't learn a ton from them just talking about their lives, but what I felt like there was what they captured. There was some great conversations with their friends and stuff that really meant more than what the words meant. Whereas we don't really get that much from these two guys here. So, um, and again, but there was a couple of interviews that I did like with some of the other side people, but overall, I was let down. Not as much as I was let down by American Dream, though.
Yeah, that's a good summary. I would give it a 2 out of 5 again. I just don't feel it's that memorable.
I give it a kind of another 5 out of 10. Like, it's whatever. I mean, we have our own review skills. I feel like a 2 out of 5 doesn't always equate to a 4 out of 10. It's kind of a weird scale where there's a bit more wiggle room. So we're still pretty close there on the score there. I'm glad I watched it. It wasn't, again, 65 minutes is not a long commitment. It didn't like irk me as strong as other films I've hated more. But again, just could have been better. And I'm not sure if just expunging all these other interviews with all the players would have done the job. I feel like
Yeah.
the whole thing would have had to have been reworked to give us a bit more, like just a bit more like content really to really satisfy me.
Yeah, I mean, I'm tempted to give it a 3 just because there's a couple of memorable things. And also Scott Blumstein, who is somebody who's almost verboten between the two of us just because of what happened with Hess. He comes off like a very good guy, and he seems like a nice person, has his head on his shoulders.
Mhm.
There's a couple fun moments of him rock climbing, and he's
Yes.
talking to the camera about how many people die in a park, and he's like, "Oh, I guess that means I'm due. No one's died this year yet. Someone's got to die soon." I thought that was a cute little moment. But yeah, it's a 2 out of 5 for me. A 2 is a movie that's just forgettable. It's not going to register with me. So.
Yeah. And then we move on to our third film here, Bet Raise Fold, the story of online poker, created in 2013. This is 100 minutes long, about an hour 40. Just off the top, like I said, now my favorite of these four right here was this film.
Yeah, I mean it's close between this one and Grinders. We'll get into it,
Yeah.
but yeah, Bet Raise Fold. It follows 3 different players. A woman named Danielle, who's sort of established as she's playing poker for her family. This is something that she's always wanted to do. We hear a lot about her parents as well. We also have Tony Dunst, who some people may remember. He's a poker commentator. He's been on television a bunch of times. And this is really about him starting his television career, and he's starting to make a name for himself as a commentator, which was really interesting to see. And then another player named Martin, who's based in Canada and is sort of, he plays online mainly. He plays some live, but he's mostly an online player, and that's how he sees the poker world. So we have 3 different takes on the poker world and the online scene right before Black Friday happens.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. The film covers like a period of 2010 into 2011, and then a little bit after that 2012. So kind of that 3-year period where there's a huge before, during, and after this whole poker online Black Friday crisis that took place. So we kind of get a overall timeline of online poker, how it started, how it developed, how things changed in 06 and in 2011, intercut with a sort of narrative storytelling of these 3 main characters. So it really covers a lot of ground and a lot of information and a lot of storytelling in a reasonable time frame. And I thought that it did a great job balancing everything and having things flow in. I mean, there's a lot happening, but it flowed very well for me too.
Yeah, I love documentaries where the documentarians are following somebody, and you'd expect the documentary to go a certain way, and then all of a sudden something happens and then the story just takes a left turn. And that's the sense I get with this documentary. This was supposed to be a fairly by the numbers. Here are these 3 people and they're online poker players, and one of them's trying to make it on TV. This is what the documentary is supposed to be. And then Black Friday happens like that.
Yes.
And then it just takes this left turn, and it's really human. Like you really do feel for these players. And there's also other people that are cut into the documentary, but I mean, you just feel for this whole community after this happens, just the confusion and anger from everybody involved. It's really well done.
I compare this to a previous documentary that covered the online cheating scandals, and how just that film was just a low budget, impersonal, overflow of information for the viewer. This one, everything that's explained carefully with enough detail that you don't ever feel like you're lost trying to follow a story along. And again, and there's real human moments, like you said. That again, I think that's one of the most important things about documentaries is having human moments that you can connect to the characters and relate to them through the situation and history that is captured on film. And I personally, was not aware of the exact origin of online poker. Obviously, I grew up in the Party Poker, Poker Stars, advertising, Full Tilt, all that stuff, all those ads on ESPN and whatnot. But I didn't know that Planet Poker in 1998, the year you were born, was the first ever online poker site. Never knew that.
Yeah, it goes through at the beginning with the history of poker, how it developed as a game. It goes through Moneymaker. There's no mention of the bluff of the century, which did irk me a little bit, but it mentions that this guy Chris Moneymaker played online poker, then he went to the main event and win, and then it goes through online poker. So this is clearly a documentary intended for people who aren't poker players. Otherwise, they wouldn't have that information in there. And they have a bunch of pros interviewed. They have Greg Raymer in there. They have Negreanu. They have poker historians and other commentators. So this is a very accessible documentary right from the very beginning.
Yeah, and it covers key spots in the poker timeline, including Party Poker with the World Poker Tour, Mike Sexton helping boost that business by 10 times with the incorporation of sort of branded television programs on major TV networks. And then we also get, of course, the introductory bio of Danielle, Martin, and Tony. Tony kind of living with those roommates that we've seen, kind of that same frat boy kind of style with guys from like 2 Months, 2 Million, for example, and past programs. So that was kind of cool. Danielle, it's interesting seeing her talk about how poker, being her own boss, working her own hours, having full shelves of food in the house compared to her humble family background. I mean, she's definitely the most sympathetic character of the three. I mean, all three guys have their moments, but she's definitely got the most story that felt the most real to me. She dreams of playing with a sponsorship, and so she tries to play some tournaments to kind of earn that sponsorship. And again, this is still the 2010, so this is when sponsor deals were still a big part of poker world, even for the less than top pros in the scene of poker.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned there's a lot of interviews with Danielle's husband and her parents, and
Yes.
Danielle is in the room with her parents, and the parents are talking about their struggles to put money on the table, and they're coming to terms with Danielle being a poker player, and it feels very real. I mean, Danielle's in the room with them, and she's rocking back and forth. I mean, she seems nervous, and it adds a human feel to this, an authentic quality that you don't get otherwise. And then conversely, you have Martin, who seems to be living by himself under fairly nice circumstances, and sort of one of those types who are playing StarCraft and then goes into poker. StarCraft and Magic the Gathering seem to be the two games that bring the most people into poker. And he drops out of college to go and play poker when he's 19 years old. So he's sort of one of those archetypal online poker players who's now playing 6 games at once, which I can't even play 2 at once. So it's crazy.
And unlike Search for the American Dream or For Love for Money, where I felt like there was one half of the narrative that I was like, let's get back to the good stuff here. I really liked both sort of halves of this film because learning about things like Mavericks, poker royalty, the etiology, the start of wearing logos on clothing for poker sites, and then getting into one of the biggest moments of poker history, the gray area in 2006, where internet poker law was murky because the headquarters of these companies were out of the country. So there was this move, I guess, from Republicans, I guess, to pass the Unlawful Gambling Enforcement Act, and the politics by which how that gets passed and why it wasn't passed before and how it got passed in 2006, and then the effects of that on the poker scene, which we saw in the main event in the mid 2000s, for example, but then also what sprouted from that and how that altered the online poker world until Black Friday came around also.
Yeah, I always thought the UIGA was its own piece of legislation. I didn't realize that they just folded it into a Port Security Act and essentially used wire fraud laws that were introduced in the 1930s to try to get online gambling illegalized. And unfortunately, it's been made illegal ever since. Though obviously, since since this documentary came out, states have now legalized it, so it's nice. But
so again,
it's a cool
this is very interesting history that even if you weren't a poker fan, it's something that you probably might be amused by learning about. So again, that's a very cool part of history that I'm now more educated on than I wasn't before. And that's the whole point of a film, is to learn about something you didn't know before.
Exactly, yeah.
There is one scene that is given a little bit of style where we see like a montage of players discussing hands, and there's kind of these on-screen graphics with hand charts and pot sizes and hand ranges and stuff, and it's a brief moment. It's kind of thrown in there in the film, but again, it does speak to the mental gymnastics players go through in the middle of a big hand as far as their game tree, thought process. So it's brief, but I also thought that was kind of a cool little bit too for what it was.
Yeah, for the most part, I mean, we do see Danielle play a little bit, playing in a tournament where she has a patch on. So, here you are watching the scene, you're thinking, oh, she's going to get a sponsorship. She's got a patch on. And then she busts at the tournament to Jason Mercier, of all people, which is kind of a fun little coincidence. Yeah. But for the most part, there's not too much play and strategy talked about in this. We see everybody playing online. We see Tony playing blind man's bluff with one card, of all things, with some of his friends.
I don't know about that. Yeah, it's a little strange. Yeah. And then so that was it. So Danielle was playing in the 2011 WPT Los Angeles Poker Championship. She busts on day 3 before the money, which is, I guess, a shame. Your last 3 days into day 3, your money. Sorry, Adam and Danielle, of that curse there. And so and then we also learn about Danielle's dad's gambling history shortly afterwards. Learning about his history, and again, genetics and addiction can run in families and stuff. So you wonder if maybe she has some of those same characteristics, but she's maybe got better control over it. You never know these things. That's why gambling is such a problem for so many families. Sometimes you grow up watching your parents do one thing, and then you develop the same habits. So there's a lot of multifactorial development there. After the gray area section in the history side of the film, we learn about the site wars, how PokerStars went global with their strategy, whereas Full Tilt did stay in the U.S. because it changed the organization of how money was transferred, and as far as the depositing money, withdrawing money. There's a visual of sort of the companies that handle each part of the money flow in these online sites. So again, that was kind of the next phase of the historical side of things, and then. At the same time, we're learning about Tony Dunst getting on a TV deal with the World Poker Tour with a bit called the Raw Deal, which I'd never heard about. I'd never really watched any of the Poker Tour related programs. I was always more of an ESPN kind of guy, plus a little bit of YouTube to supplement that. And for the most part, you don't really see much of the World Poker Tour content on YouTube or anything.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing to go over, because I just wasn't aware of the business side of making poker television. That they had this, hey, send in your tapes and we'll cast somebody type thing. So Tony gets that. And then him just talking about, I don't really know what my deal is. I have this deal, I can make segments, but whether or not my contract's going to get renewed, I don't know about that. I don't know how many tournaments I can play. I'm now the face of my generation, so to speak. I have to make poker look good for people similar to me. That part was really interesting to me. I mean, seeing him actually write out the scripts of what he's going to say and watching clips and thinking things through, I thought that was really interesting.
Not to mention, at one point, he kind of gets himself into a bit of trouble because, these young poker players, they don't live by a schedule so much. So he was late to work and missed a deadline or something. And so he's like, oh no, is all this going to work out in the end? I kind of blew it, but we'll see. And so he has a watching party for his TV debut, and it ended up being the highest rated segment. I'm not really sure how that was measured or anything, but nonetheless, so that ended up leading into an extension of his supposed contract. So that worked out very well for Tony. This all, so at this point, we're seeing Danielle play a tournament, trying to, up her prominence in the poker scene. She gets interviewed at that event she was at. Tony's doing well, and we have learned that the site wars are exploding with those two companies really dominating. And then a big montage, everyone saying they love poker, and then Black Friday.
Yeah, it's just it hits you like a hammer, even though you know it's coming. Because again, you grow to like each of these players in their own ways, and you get a good sense of the poker world. And then just all of a sudden, your accounts get frozen, and you don't know what the matter is, and everybody's freaking out.
Mhm.
And it goes from Danielle being able to provide for her family, having this confidence, buying her mom a horse of all things. And now she can't pay the bills. She can't accomplish her goals. I mean, there's an interview where she's sitting there at the table where she plays poker, and you could tell that she's fighting back tears. Her
Mhm.
eyes are getting watery. It's just heartbreaking.
Yeah, because the key detail here is that when these websites get frozen on Black Friday, all the money gets frozen, and that's for a lot of people a large percentage of their net worth or their free cash is locked up there, and especially with full tilt, that would be a much more of a problem because years and years later, no money would ever be returned to the players for poker for full tilt. PokerStars was able to release the money back to the players for the most part. We obviously learned about that in the other documentary a while back, but for Danielle in particular, that was really devastating. And prior to Black Friday, she had gotten a backup plan supposedly going to nursing school, becoming an RN. Ben the RN here, by the way, so cool. But it doesn't look like she actually worked as a nurse at any point after Black Friday. She ends up working at a restaurant. So I'm a little confused about how that worked out supposedly.
Yeah.
But whereas for in Canada, Martin is really kind of separate. This is an American only problem. So he's kind of like on the outside looking into all this stuff like, well, I can still play. I mean, obviously there's fewer American players playing, but so it does change the demographics of the online scene for a bit, but he's still more or less okay. So it was kind of nice to have someone kind of not be affected to contrast to someone who was severely affected. And then Tony's still kind of on the periphery as well, like doing this TV stuff and being a part of, he's shown in a tournament after Black Friday. So he's, trying to carry on like life is the same. So you kind of have three unique spins on players affected by Black Friday in the end.
Yeah, Martin has just so many great lines during his little speech to the camera. He says, America is the place where the song, "You've got to know when to hold them, know when to fold them," is a popular song. Yet they want to get rid of online gambling. I now play against a lot of Europeans, and you can tell that there's a difference in the way they play between Europeans and Americans. It's all very interesting.
Mhm.
And then Tony, yeah, he's now playing live. And there's an interview with the camera where he seems genuinely angry. I mean, you can tell in his voice and in the way he's speaking and his cadence, talking about how the IRS is going to just screw everybody because they're now going to get taxed on money that they can't get from the poker sites. And that never really dawned on me. It's like, yeah, you can get taxed on that income because it's still technically your money. You just can't access it. It's mind blowing.
Yeah. It's not great. And there's a mildly optimistic epilogue at the end of all this for poker because of just this again event. Those couple of years was really a eventful time in the poker scene. Companies being bought out and money being released for some, but not for others, and things changing here and there. So and again, this is about 10 years ago now from the end of what this film covered things. So I think online poker world's a bit less controversial at this point. You don't see these giant scandals of cheating allegations. I mean, there's still find them there and here and there, but nothing nearly as bad. PokerStars swooped in to buy Full Tilt essentially, even though the money wasn't paid out. Tony, kind of his roommates, his apartment's just kind of totally empty. Everyone went to Canada to play online, so that changed for him. The Raw deal was a big hit. You continue to be a part of that for a long time. And Danielle, I looked up her Hendon mob. She actually cashed in main event in both 2017 and 2019.
Oh, good for
So
her.
she is still playing poker, still obviously doing pretty well to afford two main event buy-ins and then cash in those two for a decent chunk. So it seems like it's not a happy ending. It's not a super sad ending. It's kind of like maybe just below average for happy, like 4 out of 10 on that sad to happy rating.
Yeah, it said Martin now plays in a band, and I Googled the band, and their Facebook page hasn't been updated since 2015. So there's that part of it. Yeah, I mean, it does definitely have this sort of ray of hope type ending, but for the most part, again, you're just so attached to these people to just see them go through all this that Danielle has to leave poker and work in a bar essentially to support her family. It's just it does get to you.
I mean, I would have to assume that her husband does work,
Yeah.
because that's just, that's being responsible parenting. If he's not, then that's, that's on them. But and Danielle, she, what I feel bad, but then I really want to know about this whole RN thing. Like that's just the
Yeah.
most people talking about it. That's a big question for me. Maybe I'll try to find her and ask her about that. It'd be kind of funny. But otherwise, so again, all these talking points I've had about this film, it really is a very solid documentary. It's my favorite by far. These four we're discussing, and you said it's maybe close to Grinders. I give it an 8 out of 10. As much as I love it, though, I have a very long list of like my all-time favorite documentaries, and this one doesn't quite get there, but it gets pretty close. And it really never felt like it was overwhelming of information. It felt like everyone got the attention that they needed. It told me information that was informative, that it hit me emotionally, and so I'm super thrilled that we watched this one.
Yeah, I mean, the only, I'd say, big shortcoming worth mentioning in this documentary is that I felt that Martin's storyline was more underdeveloped in comparison to
I
Tony
agree.
and
I
Danielle's.
agree.
But on the other hand, again, as we mentioned, Black Friday didn't shake him. He just continued to play online. And he mentioned that he was never interested in getting sponsored. He never wants to play live. He just wants to focus on online poker. That's totally fine, but it doesn't make for as interesting drama as the other two. But yeah, overall, this is a very good documentary. As I said, it seems to be intended for people who are more lay, who aren't super into the game. So if you're not super into the game, I would recommend watching it. And I give it a 4 out of 5, I think. It's a good documentary.
Yeah, to your point about Martin, he's given probably the least amount of time of the three main systems anyway, so it kind of works out okay. And plus, I think he serves more as a contrast than anything else than the main subject. And again, it's rare we get a documentary besides maybe like Startup.com that kind of covers the before and after of a major event for that industry. And so that makes it, it's so rare. Oftentimes a documentary about, World War II is made long after World War II. You don't get a film that was made during World War II. So, but for historical documentaries like this, you get a unique spin on covering the before and after of a big event in history.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that leads us into our fourth film, Grinders, produced in 2011, 74 minutes long, so a little over an hour. This one kind of falls in the middle for me as quality. So the main, much like the previous film, there's sort of 3 or 4 main threads in this film. For me, though, it's a very variety-packed mixed bag of how well each story is handled. We have the main filmmaker, Matt Gallagher. The introduction sets up the film as if, he's hit by the recession, losing work in filmmaking, so he wants to support his family playing poker. He's got a kid and potentially another kid on the way, so he's trying to play these underground games to support his family.
Mm-hmm. And then there's 3 other players, as you mentioned. There's this guy, Danny, who is this sort of grinder. I don't know how to put this politely, a little bit of a degenerate poker player who also plays in these games with Matt. There's another guy named Andre, who's a younger player in his 20s and is sort of the Mike Madisell of this documentary. Very loud, very egotistical. When he rakes in the chips, he makes sure to like pour them over his head like he's lathering himself in shampoo. And then Lawrence, who's the guy that runs this illegal poker room. And yeah, it's just the story that Lawrence goes through is just crazy, that he has his poker room. Seems like it's pretty well done and set up, but then his landlord locks him out of the poker room and essentially extorts him for $6,000 and won't open up the room again. And it just, all these sort of storylines interweave with each other as time goes on.
Now, the first like third of this film, I thought was absolutely fantastic. We see underground games, like real underground games, like in Rounders. Yeah. And it's, we're sort of seeing these casino games, these house like friends playing. We've never really seen this kind of semi-illegal, shady, rented space game. That's really cool. Lawrence's story is absolutely amazing. Like it's so real and raw. And I've never seen anything like before in any film before. Just like this guy trying to make a living, gets screwed, tries to get help. The system fails him, and he kind of just he takes a big L on this whole thing. Unfortunately, the other 3 stories really, for me, didn't amount to much. Especially the biggest letdown was Matt's story personally. He's kind of the narrator, but there's never really anything. His story is just kind of one note. His wife's pregnancy detail is like the whole story. His poker doesn't really get focused on.
Yeah.
The introduction doesn't really do justice to the execution of what the first few minutes would suggest.
Yeah, I mean, Matt again sort of weaves in and out as the narrator and as the documentary filmmaker. We see him play a couple times against Andre, seems to do okay, quits himself fine.
Yeah.
But I mean, I liked the part with his wife being pregnant. It's established that his wife had miscarriages in the past. They were very lucky to have their first child. Now their second child, there's one moment where he's filming his little baby daughter running around the floor, and the wife comes home and says, there's a 50-50 chance I'm going to lose the child. And she's clearly very emotional. I mean, there's tears in her eyes. She's sort of walking back and forth. He seems emotional. That moment really hit me, because that's just like a real human moment to include in this. And then eventually they lose the baby, unfortunately. And the movie just kind of ends with him, I suppose, just sort of leaving poker permanently and just sort of being with his families. I guess what the implication of that ending's supposed to be. Yeah, I mean, I don't feel the poker angle of his storyline got a whole lot, but I felt that the pregnancy angle did. Because again, it weaves in and out. At one point, he mentioned there's an 80% chance they're going to keep the child and then they lose it. So that's just like very devastating. And to hear him talk about luck and how luck doesn't really matter outside of poker after he's just lost his child, that did hit me.
No, I mean, I'm not suggesting that the miscarriage stuff was unemotional, but I don't think it really belongs in this film, so to speak. I think it deserves its own time and attention to the family, trying to make ends meet for a possibly growing family and having tragedy. I don't think it belongs in this kind of movie, really. I think it's almost disrespectful to sully a real pregnancy family story with poker like this. I think these two themes don't really mix, even if it involves luck. Sort of, I felt it was just kind of from a health standpoint disrespectful to do that.
I wouldn't go. I mean, it's his own documentary, and he's talking about his own experience. So I don't know.
I understand, but just it's given so little thematic attention. It's just having a few narrations sort of tie it together didn't really work for me when you're cutting in Andre and Danny beer after beer on his computer falling asleep. I mean, I don't know. It didn't for me. It just felt like oil and water.
I wouldn't go that far, but yeah, I mean, I liked it fine. I mean, the Andre is, again, as I mentioned, the sort of braggadocious young poker player, and he's sort of the comic of it. And he's trying to get on, what was the show called? I can't remember. Team Victory or something?
Yeah, Victory Poker or something.
Victory Poker, which I've never heard of. He's trying to get on the show, and he kind of sees it as his golden ticket to the future. Yeah, I mean, I can understand thematically how you go from this sort of crazy guy who's talking a big game to, this more sort of quiet domestic drama. How that can be a little jarring for some people. Again, it worked fine for me because, again, the stories are kind of weaving in and out throughout. But,
Well, also, I should clarify that it's also just like the mat poker stuff.
Yeah.
With the wife pregnancy stuff like that. It's, oh, I played poker tonight. I lost some money. Okay, let's go home. Oh, wife tells me the doctor said this. Like, it just didn't feel like it was a well handled, well like edited sort of subplot in this sort of four subplot documentary. When again the introduction of the film is all about I'm playing money, late hours, trying to make $500 a night. We don't even know how much money he's made over the course of this, or what that money means to his family, or are they going to be homeless if he loses another night, or like we don't really get any of that at all either.
Yeah, that could be well developed. That could be better developed, the poker stuff. Yeah.
So Danny, he's probably my second favorite of the four stories because he's supposedly a family man. He's playing in tournaments. He plays a tournament in Vancouver, gets kings deep in it, beats aces by turning a king. Is up on the trip, but he's kind of let down by how much money he won, and then he goes to Las Vegas with a backer and makes a deep run, finishing in 11th place in a horse event deep run. That sounds familiar. And so that's okay. Again, kind of that nosebleed sort of storytelling where we see a tournament happen. Nothing, maybe not as enjoyable as those films handled it, but it's something. I just didn't really care much for Andre's portion in particular, even though he auditioned and wins. We don't really see what that leads to. Like it's almost as if we
Yeah.
the first half of a story that we should see the other half of, which we never do.
Yeah, I mean, again, I've never heard of victory poker. I have no idea what that. I have no idea what that is.
Yeah.
Esfandiari says like, "Congrats, Andre. We voted for your video. Wonder how much you got paid for that." You know, I have no idea. Yeah, I mean, the Danny subplot I do think works for me. That he's, you know, we see him weave in and out. He seems to be a decent enough player, but he drinks quite a lot of alcohol, and at one point mentions that he was actually in Gamblers Anonymous and that he got better. And he even says there's very few people who go from compulsive gambling to normal gambling, but I think I've conquered that. I've made that transition. And you look at him saying also that he plays better when he's drunk and he's falling asleep at his computer in the hotel room and drinking a lot and eating a lot of takeout food. And you just have to wonder, you know.
I mean, the best shot of the whole film was him asleep at his table, and then the "it's your turn" noise wakes him up.
Yeah.
That was pretty great. But otherwise, really the Lawrence story is really like my favorite part of this film. We haven't talked about it yet. He's running these things off the books. He has security cameras, his own chips. He runs these games, and then he gets locked out by his landlord, who wants to extort him for $6,000. And the problem is he has $40,000 worth of equipment in his rented room. And I guess the implication is he didn't have that cash to spare, because I feel like even if you're being extorted, you need that $40,000 of stuff. So 6K, fine, give him the money, get your stuff and run. But I guess that was an option for him. And so he actually goes to the police, has to lie to the police, goes to a lawyer, makes a deal off screen with the lawyer. Like that's just really cool stuff that you don't see in films nowadays.
Yeah, and you actually get video of him going into the police station and talking to the police, and the police just won't do anything. It's like, well, just clear it up with your landlord. Lawrence actually says, "I need to go get my medication that's in the building." Lying, he's looking for his poker equipment, and the cops still won't do anything. And then he goes to this strip mall lawyer in this little law office and actually says to him, like, "I'll give you something. Matt, turn off the camera." You actually see the footage of it. It's just crazy. And the lawyer is also looking at the camera every now and again. Did you notice that? Just kind of like sheepishly looking over at him. It's really just interesting footage. It really is.
Yeah, and again, it ends on a downbeat note. He gets beat up at one point. He kind of blames himself for not moving out of the way. And again, this is an older gentleman, and probably an immigrant, I have to assume from his accent. And so just trying to make a living. And it's given, maybe, I think probably the most attention out of all the stories as far as covering each element of a journey. Everyone else doesn't really have a journey besides actually making a video. And so for me, this was really, really fun to watch that story. It's otherwise, again, it's not a bad film. I just think that there's some squander potential particularly with Matt's story. There could have been a lot more attention and like actual footage of his journey playing poker added to that plot line. But overall, again, it ranks second for me of these four films. I give it a 6.5 out of 10.
Yeah, I would give it a 3 out of 5. There's, the Lawrence subplot's just so interesting. By the way, he goes to tenant court and loses his case, by the way, and doesn't get his stuff back. And supposedly his landlord was going to give his stuff to another casino, which is just mind-boggling to me. Another poker room, I should say. Yeah. I really like that storyline. I agree with you that maybe Matt's poker angle could have been a little bit more established. Even the miscarriage stuff, again, does land for me emotionally. But yeah, in terms of technical aspects, there's some decent shots here and there. There's sort of a stylistic element of this Elvis impersonator on a bus that the kind of cuts to as narrations presented over it, which I kind of like visually, just seeing this Elvis impersonator just riding around on a bus through Las Vegas and walking around Las Vegas. I thought was kind of neat. We also didn't mention that Daniel Negreanu, of all people, appears in this documentary, interviewed a couple of times. I mean, here are these grinders. Here's Lawrence being locked out of his livelihood. Here's, Andre and Danny struggling to make a name for themselves. And then here's Negreanu on his own private golf green, practicing his chip shots. And then he goes inside and he's playing pool. And he talks about, I've traveled to 4 countries in 5 days. So it's a really interesting dichotomy there. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of little things to admire here, even if overall things could be better polished. So yeah, 3 out of 5 is what I would give this documentary.
Hmm. And so again, a unique quartet of films here. I think anybody watching this will find something they can latch on to. But I think we're talking about people trying to win a horse event or get a bracelet. I think we need to discuss our latest attempts at winning a medal in the 2023 Mind Sport Olympiad. There's only been a handful of events thus far. There was one open event and a few closed community events. We've had a few stories to share here, so you tell me. You're the MSO expert, veteran here. You tell me how does your MSO begin?
Yeah, so just to let again everyone know, the MSO started actually in January, February, Friday, January 27th is when the event began with 7-card stud, and also there's chess, there's Sushi Go. I don't know what that is. There's Grand Western Trail. There's all sorts of different games, all sorts of different varieties. So check it out in addition to poker. But yeah, 7-card stud, which both Ben and I played in.
A little bit.
Yeah, I mean, we did okay at first, both of us, right? I mean,
so unfortunately, because of the time difference in the UK, it began at 2 p.m. in America, and I have a job, a full-time job, so I was only able to play the first like 20 minutes of that event. And so everyone begins with 10,000 chips. Blinds are like, or limits are like 100, 200, and I was up to 13,000 by the end of 20 minutes, and I was chip leader when I had to leave for work, so I was pretty much running the table. I was hitting. I made a couple of different straights and got paid off, and it definitely felt like I had a substantial edge over the rest of the table by that point. And it wasn't the largest event. I think there was what, like 20, 24 players, something like that.
Something like that, yeah.
And so I left with a chip lead. I obviously blinded my way down until I was out. How did you do?
I mean, yeah, I won a couple of hands at first. I think it was up to like 12 or 13 or something like that. And yeah, I mean, I'm a tight player, so I just wait for the best hand as much as I possibly can, wait for the best cards. And then yeah, toward the end of the tournament, or my run rather, I should say, not the end of the tournament, I misplayed. I made a bad call on 7th Street. I had pocket kings, and the guy bet big, and I can't remember how much of my stack it was. And I called with my pair of pocket kings, figuring that my one pair was good. He had 2 pairs, so I lost a bunch of chips. And then I'm trying to remember the last hand. I think I had, I think it was pocket queens or something, pocket tens. Mm-hmm. And I raised with 3 cards, and the guy raises over me, and he has an ace exposed. I'm just saying to myself, there's no way. Like, I have pocket tens. I'm a short stack. I'm supposed to go all in here. There's no way that he has aces. There's no way. I called anyway. And, 4th Street were, a brick for me and a brick for him. And he bets big again. And I'm like, I don't have enough chips. I got to pretty much just play this hand. There's no way that he has aces. Like, I can't be this unlucky that he has aces when I have tens. So I raised all in. He calls. And yeah, sure enough, he had aces. And so the next streets broke down, so I busted. So yeah, I mean, I misplayed those 2 hands. So I can't remember when I got 10th place, you got 12th place. That's what happened.
Out of like 28, something like that?
Yeah, out of 28. So we both finished in the top half of the field.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I wasn't really in any position to win. I wasn't running super, super well. I just, picked up a couple of hands here or there, but then those last 2 hands really just cost me.
And I believe on last Sunday, so about 6 days ago, there was an open Texas Hold'em event, I believe. Yeah. So there was not just MSO players. So I think it was like 400 something players in there.
Yep.
I just was up and down a little bit here and there. Never really had a ton of chips. And then I busted in like the first. I made it to like the final third of the field, so not quite enough to really be super impressive. But and then you lasted, fairly longer than me, I think.
Yeah, I think you were like 170th or something, and I was like 101st.
Something like that. I remember I had I shoved like 3 big blinds of like Queen 8 suited from the cutoff and got called by King Jacks of the same suit, and then I rivered a six outer to double up, and then the very next hand I got like 2 kings or something, and I went all in and got called by Ace Jack suited, and they flopped 2 pairs, so I busted. But had I won that hand, I would have probably had a good like 20 big blind or something like that. So it really was one clean board away from maybe making it into a deep run there. And then You obviously lasted a little bit longer than me.
Yeah, I mean, again, I was a fairly short stack, just kind of hung in there.
Yep.
And then I went all in with, I think, pocket fives, and two guys called me, and the flop was like queen 8-3 or something, and they both went all in, and they had like queen jack and queen 10 or something, so I busted. But yeah, 101st isn't terrible out of 400 people. I cashed, so.
That's true. You made the money.
Yeah.
And then the next event was the horse event.
Yep.
That was, I believe, it was a couple days ago
On Wednesday.
on Wednesday.
Mhm.
And so, obviously, of course, you're rotating 5 games. It got off to a pretty good start for me. I right out of the bat, limit hold'em was really where I was just wrecking the table. I was getting some big opening hands, and I was getting paid off, and they really didn't seem to know how to play back at me. And so by the end of the first orbit, I was like chip leader, and really for like the first third of the tournament, I was the chip leader, or in the top 3 at all times. And then there were just a few select hands where I just got super unlucky, and I would fall back to earth and then get a few back and then fall back down. And then really for the last back half of the tournament, I was kind of a short stack. But you were watching my table too. You saw some of the horrific beats I took. I once had aces against queen 10 suited. They made a flush, and I lost that one. And then probably the hand that changed the whole tournament was pretty much halfway into the event. There was I think there was what like 32 players in the whole thing.
Mhm.
Halfway in, I had ace king. The chip leader at my table had ace nine. We're putting I three bet pre-flop with ace king. He calls me. Board comes 2-5-4. I bet he calls. River's an ace. I don't think he's got a 3, so I bet he raises me. I call. River is a 9. I check. He bets. I call. He has ace 9. I top 2 pair. I had ace king. It was like I want to say like a 30,000 chip pot at that point.
Yeah.
And I would have been chip leader if I'd won that hand, and instead I fall to the middle of the pack and he kind of ascends. And well, at this time you're kind of hanging in there on the other table. And we both made it to the final 2 tables. We were at different tables at that time, and it really was a grind. Really, like I never really accumulated any chips at any point, and then I believe you busted in 11th place. Is that right?
Yeah, I was a stud hand. I went all in with 2 aces, and the guy calls me, and he gets like a pair of nines on Fifth Street, and the Sixth Street he has was like 9-10 Jack Queen, all of spades showing, and I just have my pair of aces, and the river gives him a third 9, so that's what knocked me out. Three nines versus 2 aces, which again, I mean, I was a short stack pocket aces. You go all in. And I always just try to focus on making the top half of the field. That's my first goal, is making the top half of the field, and I did. So no hard feelings.
So after you go out, there's only 10 left, and I'm like ninth out of 10, and then someone else goes out in ninth. I'm the short stack on the final table bubble,
Right.
and this bubble lasts an eternity. I'm just waiting and waiting. On the bubble, I had pocket nines and limit hold'em. I raised all in the big blind. No, I wasn't all in pre-flop, but I got called by 6-4 on the bubble. The guy tries to bluff me on the turn with either a pair of 4s and a flush draw. It was a 10 on the turn, so I'm like, well, I have 9s, hopefully no 10. So I make one of the tougher play money poker calls of my life, and I call him. I see he's got the pair on the flush draw. He bricks the river. I double up on the bubble, and then at the other table, someone busts, so we consolidated to the final table. And on the first hand of the final table, I double up an Omaha high low to at least get out of the doghouse for a little bit longer. And again, I really just was waiting and waiting. I was in like 7th place with like 8 left, and then one player finally goes out in 7th, but then the rest of the table going action here, just no one's busting. Just no one's busting. Everyone's staying a lot of chips. I fold my way down in stud. I'm putting these antes in. They're like half my chips at this point in a couple hands. I shove my last 1.5 big blinds and limit hold'em with pocket nines. I get called by the big blind who 6-4 again, the same guy, and they hold up, so I double up there. But then from there, I got. If I showed the hand histories, there were just so many spots where I just got so screwed in key moments. particularly in Raz and in Limit Hold'em, that if just one of those hands go the other way, I'm probably gonna, medal this event, honestly. I ended up busting in 7th place in Raz. I got the money. I think I had like 7, 6, 4.
Yeah.
And then I got a 5 on 4th Street, put my last few chips in. The guy called a like drawing to a 10. And then I just never improved, and he improved on 5th Street, and I lost. So I lasted about a little over 3 hours. The entire event took about 4 hours. So it's a final table, not quite a medal, not quite my result I was hoping for, but I'm happy to have shown that I can outplay some people in horse. I really honestly felt, not to toot my own horn, that I
Yeah.
was outplaying most of the other players. I maybe made like 2 or 3 bad calls per se, but I stole a lot of pots without too much drama, and just Limit Hold'em. I was wrecking each time it went back to Limit Hold'em. I was like, bring it on. Those first few game orbits, I was just crushing it in Limit Hold'em.
Yeah, I mean, you really were the chip leader or the top three for a very long period of time. I was doing okay. I mean, I think I was in the top 5 a couple times, or at least for a little
No,
bit.
no, we were in the top 3 in the first 5 games. We were both in the top 3 for most of that.
Yeah, I mean, but you were really doing well, and then yeah, you just as the blinds increase, and then if the cards don't go your way, it just changes dramatically.
Yeah, I never had, I think, more than 3 starting stacks at any point in time. Which 25,000 when you have 10,000 start is pretty good for the first half of the tournament, and then I just kept waiting and waiting, and I hung around pretty long as a short stack, but it's hard to ladder up when no one's busting besides you.
And speaking up of hanging on as the short stack, Omaha High Low, which was on Thursday, which again was something that you, Ben, couldn't play all of. So talk a little bit about your experience, and then
Well, again, I was just trying to see every flop possible. I only could play the first like 20 minutes because I'd leave for work that afternoon, and so when those first 2 levels, those 10-minute levels, so I could really kind of limp or something the first 2 levels and just try to make something. And I literally just made 0 hands. I think I won like 2 small pots in 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And so when I left, I was down like 6% of my starting stack by that point, which was whatever. I mean, I didn't expect to do super well. You're not going to win the tournament in the first 20 minutes anyway. But so I didn't do much. I just kind of folded my way to nothing. And in your case, though, I think you did a bit better than me.
Yeah, so the tournament began with me having to fold the second nut low on, I think, the very first hand of the entire tournament, after the players in front of me just went crazy. And I just said to myself, I didn't have the high. So it's like, all right, I have the second nut low, but these guys are going crazy. They must have the nut low. So I folded. Sure enough, they did have the nut low. I didn't lose too many chips, but still, I mean, that was like the very first hand. So I blind down for a little while, and then I'm heads up against one guy. 4th Street, there's 2 low cards on the board, and there's 2 spades on the board. I have pocket kings, which is an overpair, and then the ace deuce. So I have the low draw with an overpair. The guy goes all in, and I tank for a moment. I'm thinking this over. And I just said he'd been playing fairly aggressively before. I felt, again, I have the nut low draw. I don't have any flush cards, but I have an overpair, and I just felt that was good, so I called. He turns over a flush draw for the high, no low draw. So a low card gives me half the pot. And then if the board pairs, I get the whole thing. And the river was the 9 of spades giving him the flush. So goes his way. So I'm down to like 5,200 chips with like 30 players remaining. So I was the short stack 29 of 29 with, again, 5K. And I'd been playing a lot of hands because I kept getting pocket aces and I kept getting pocket kings, like just over and over again. And I just kept losing. So I said to myself, Sam, tight is right. Just fold. So I blinded my way down to about 3,700. And I think that was about like 10 big blinds at this point. So we're at like 150, 300, I think was the blinds. And I get dealt pocket aces. So I figure, all right, I just got to go with this. And I think maybe like I had a 3 in my hand. I can't remember what. So I go all in. 2 guys call me. Flops dealt out. I think they just checked it down all the way to the river. I turned over my hand, aces, and I think there were 2 8s on the board. That was good. So I tripled up. I was up to like 11-4. And then, yeah, I mean, I kept tight as right all the way through. There were about 19 players or so, and I tripled up. And I just sort of hung in there like 11th of 19, just sort of picking up a few small pots. I never cracked 20K. never once in the whole tournament. But I made the final table. You got 11th.
I believe
So
too.
yeah, so I made the final table. I don't think I ever busted a player either. So I was like seventh, sixth of nine or seventh of nine. And I mean, I'm like just free rolling at this point, right? Because I mean, again, I was 29th of 29th. I remember saying to myself, it's a miracle if I make the top half of the field. So to make the final table is just incredible. There was this one player, Kazuchi, who was up to 144K, and then everybody else was between like 20 and 40. He knocked out a player with a king high flush when the other player had a queen high flush and won like 100K off of that. Like it was insane. There was no low cards. It was all high. King high flush versus queen high flush. I mean, I couldn't believe it. I saw it at my table. And it's funny when we get to the final table and he shows up with 144K, everybody in the chat, who nobody had been talking in the chat before, everyone starts going, oh, so that's where all the chips were. Everyone said that, which was really funny. So, at this point, I'm just trying to survive. I have again 20, 30K, so not too much. I lose a couple pots, I win a couple small pots. The other players, bust one by one. Kazuchi didn't actually play super aggressive like I thought he would. Other players sort of picked off each other and started to build up their stacks. So we're down to four-handed, and I'm still alive at like 16K, like barely anything. And Kazuchi's got like 120K. There's another player that has 110K, and then another player has 60K. So I have to double up 2 or 3 times in order to have any shot. I managed to pick up a couple small pots. I got down to like 9K at one point, then I doubled up. And then I went all in on my last hand with like a suited ace-5. I think it was like ace-5, 6-3 or something. Suited ace-5, went all in. The guy called me with a queen-jack 9-3, and the flop came up queen-jack brick. And so he knocked me out with 2 pair. But again, like I got 4th place out of 32 players, and I was the short stack with 29 left. I got very lucky that people busted as they did. I don't see it as me almost winning a medal. I see it as making the final table because, again, I need to scoop that hand, double up again, and then win another pan to be at 50K or so in order to have a shot at medaling. So 4th place finish is very respectful. I also cashed, so that was nice.
Yeah, so the final table score here is Ben 1, Sam 1. So there's another event tomorrow, 5-card draw, which that's a game I know even less than stud. So
yeah, I'm at a 5-card draw.
I might just play super tight and just like wait till I get dealt like monster hands. I don't know. We'll see how the other players play. That might be the most sit back and observe approach I might take to this entire MSO, because even in horse, I was really latching in onto the spots where I had the best setups and observing. Players would play pretty tight in the stud games, and in limit hold'em they were pretty much calling for any flop. So if you had a big hand, you could really take advantage. So we'll see. I'll be happy with the top half finish, I guess, too. But I also, we'll see if we can make some magic happen too.
Yeah, 5-card draw I'm terrible at. So
yeah.
And then 6+ hold'em I'm even worse at. So
I mean, I at least know that game by virtue of knowing 6+ hold'em versus 5-card draw. I don't really know the math or the basic strategy to that game really, besides just you have a lot good hand, bet a lot. So we'll see. We'll see. It's still very early going. We still have the next that's kind of the end of the first batch of games after this week, but there's going to be another whole roster of games, some of the heads up tournament style championships coming up too. So we'll see. It's early.
Yeah, so I mean, to give the full schedule, 5-card draw is tomorrow, Sunday. Again, that'll be about 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. 6+ hold'em, is Saturday, February 11th. Omaha Heads Up is Monday, February 13th. Heads Up Hold'em is Saturday, February 25th. 6-card Omaha is Monday, February 27th. I've never played that before. And then Friday, March 10th is Deuce through 7 triple draw. And then Saturday, March 11th is Texas Hold'em, with the final event being Sunday, March 12th, which is Raz. So a bunch of different games. And as I mentioned, there's a lot of other stuff that you can play at the MSO, all for free, as long as you have Poker Stars. So go out and do it.
All right. I think that just about covers all of our talking points for this episode. We're still working on our very special guest for episode number 50, so we'll hopefully get that together moving forward. And otherwise, guys, hopefully you find something that you can appreciate in these documentaries we discussed. And they're all available on YouTube, so check them out. Otherwise, enjoy your poker, enjoy your TV, and enjoy your poker on TV.
Take care, everyone. Stay warm. It's very cold out.
-6 degrees.
Oh my God. Stay warm.
All right, bye, guys.